3D printing has become a great outlet for the creative process in producing models that are both creative and utilitarian. We're going to go through a simple download, a slice, a print, and then we'll talk about cleaning up the model and what paints to use. I hope you enjoy it. So let's talk about the basics of 3D printing. We're going to start with basically just downloading a model from an open source website, putting it into a slicer. I'll show you how the slicer works, just the basics for it, and then the process of 3D printing. So let's go ahead and get into a couple of things that we have available to us, a few websites. Thingiverse is always the go-to. It's an open source site where people basically just post models that you can download and print. There's a website called TurboSquid that you can download 3D models from. It's searchable as well. It also has pay models that you can pay for, and so does Clara.io. You can sign up for a free Clara account and then go into their library. You can search it and download those models to be used for 3D printing as well. But let's go back to Thingiverse. And when you go to their homepage, you'll see what's popular in the world of 3D printing. And these are usually pretty good models to download and print. They work pretty well. You can also search it. And I need a iPad tripod mount. So I can type in what I would like to look for, and a bunch of options come up for iPad tripod mounts. I always suggest downloading something that either has a lot of likes, or you can see an actual picture of it that's been printed. A lot of times people will start to put like works in progress in Thingiverse, and you download something and it's not really a very good printable file. And this is something that has a bunch of pictures, so it looks like this is printable. One nice feature of Thingiverse as well is you can go up here in your screen and you can click this thingy view, so you can kind of drag around and take a look at it three-dimensionally before you download it. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and download this thing. I'll click download all files, and we'll get some advertisement here. After the advertisement, it'll start downloading, and then it'll come in as a zip file. I'll open that up, pull out the file, and put it in the slicer so that you can see that. Before I do that, it's always good to take a look at any text, any notation underneath your model, a summary, instructions that says print with supports. It's important that you do that, because if I would print this without supports, the supports are the little things underneath parts of the model that allow you to actually have it printed in space. Without that, this would have been a failed model. And just for the sake of demonstration, let's go back to the home page and we'll download something a little bit more complex so that you can see the difference between the two. So this Baby Yoda looks like it's a popular thing. There's some thumbnails here. There's a printed version, and it looks like it's got a bunch of makes and likes. So there'll be some commentary in here that will tell you a little bit about what people have done to make this a successful print. So it's worth taking a look at that. For print settings, it gives you actual printer that they were using. RAFs, it says it doesn't matter. I like to print with RAFs. Supports, yes. Resolution, infill, 20%, so on and so forth. And the actual material that they used was PLA. I'm going to go ahead and download those files as well, again just for the sake of some variety with this. And I'll drag those zip files out on the desktop, expand those, and we'll get into to how to drop those in and slice them. So I'm going to expand those, and here's my tripod mount. I'll open up that folder, and there's only one file in there, and I can get a preview of that by opening it up, or I can go to open with, and I can go to preview and get a little bit better res version to take a look at what the model looks like. And I could do that obviously with the Baby Yoda as well. The slicer that I'm using is Simplify 3D. Most 3D printers will come with software to slice, or you can download those a lot of times for free. But this one's worked pretty well for us, and it's simple to use. So you have a viewport here that shows you what the 3D printer bed will look like, or when the model's dropped into that bed. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to open up my file, drag it into the viewport, and it drops in basically ready to go, ready to be processed and sliced. All of my processes are over here with the different 3D printers I use, the Wasp, Flash Forge. In this case I'm using a row stock. So if I double click that process, I can make adjustments to it, or I can add a process and put in those different features or parameters that's recommended to print something. Infill percentage is right here. That's important. That's that little honeycomb on the inside of your model. If it's something that you need some type of structure for, you're going to want 20% or more to make it strong. If it's just a model like that Baby Yoda, we can bump that down, and I'll show you that here in just a second. We're working with PLA, so I'm going to leave that. I want to include a raft, and as it mentioned in the notes, we need to generate a support, so I'll click that as well. And then there's other additions and adjustments that you can make. Once you start getting good with 3D printing, you can tweak your models and how you print to your liking. We slow the speed way down when we print lithophanes, things like that. So I'm happy with these settings. I'll click OK, and I'm ready to go ahead and slice this thing. So here's my model, and I'm going to hit Prepare to Print. Make sure you select the process that you want to use, and you can see that the viewport changed, and you can see a version of that model printed. And to see how it would print, we can drag these buttons down here and see what that first layer, the second layer, third layer, so on and so forth look like, how the structures are printing, so on and so forth. It also shows that honeycomb on the inside of the model. You can see these little crisscrosses here. If I would bump the infill up, those crisscrosses would be smaller, and there'd be a lot more of them. The structure would be a little bit stronger even, perhaps. But just to hold an iPad on a tripod mount, I think this will work out fine. When I'm happy with the process, I look at the build time. It's going to take about 3 hours. In my case, I'm going to save this model to an SD card and click Save Toolpath to Disk. Select my card, and I want to rename it. A lot of times when there's a ton of characters in the name of the print, for whatever reason, some 3D printers don't like that, so I always simplify it. So I'm just going to type in print, click Save, and that will save to my SD card, and I can take that SD card and put it in the slot to print. And here's the G code labeled as I labeled it. So I can drag that to the trash, eject it, and 3D print. Now, a couple quick things about models. Let's go back and talk through making some adjustments. I'm going to just stick with this model because it looks like it sliced fast, and I'll show you some other features. If I double click on the model itself in the viewport, I can scale the size up or down. This is with uniform scaling checked. If I uncheck that and I scale up one of the axes, you can see that not everything's scaling up. It's just the axis that that I'm clicking. I can also go in and I can highlight that number and punch in perhaps a consistent number if I need to redo something or redo the process. But in this case, I'm going to reset the scale and go back to uniform scaling to keep it the same. I can add supports by clicking this little support button here. I can click Generate Automatic Supports, and you can see that the program filled those in. If I want to add more support structures, I can do that just by clicking Add New Structure, and I can go around, and any overhangs I can add extra structures if I want. So I like to look at the models from underneath, and any yellow that I see, I like to fill those in with other supports. In this case, I wouldn't need them, but just for demonstration purposes, you can see that I can really zoom in and be as precise as I want to add those supports. Every time I click, it adds a new support. Let's go back and take a look at a couple other quick things, and then we'll drop the Baby Yoda in here and prep it as well. If I want more than one model, let's say that I'm worried about this model failing, or I need 2 or 3 of them, I can go up to Edit, and I can go to Duplicate Models. or hit Command D on the keyboard if you're using shortcuts, and I can make as many of these as I need to fit on the bed. So let's say I want 3 of them. I'm going to make 2 copies, hit copy, and you can see that it made a couple more. Those don't fit on the bed right now, so I need to go over to center and arrange over here, and when I click center and arrange, it basically puts them on the bed ready to be printed. Anytime that you drop something to the table and it's crooked or kind of lopsided, you can rotate these things over here with the X, Y, and Z axis, or you can go in and just punch in like say 90 degrees, hit enter, and it will drop it to 90 degrees. Notice when I did that, it's kind of flopped over, so I'd want to hit that center and arrange again so that it puts it in a position where it can be 3D printed. I'm going to go ahead and remove those, and let's talk about a little bit more complex model, this Baby Yoda. So I'm going to double click that. It's got a bunch of images here so you can see what the print looked like, and they supplied us with a lot of visuals. There's a license there, and this README text. Looks like it has the guy's name in it that made it. So there's an OBJ here, and that preview's taken a while, so that tells me there might be some issue with that, or it's a big file. Actually, that is pretty big, 137 megabytes. So I'll click on this other one. It's about half the size of the file. This is Baby Yoda version 2, looks like. So I'm going to drop that into my bed, and there's Baby Yoda. Again, if I want to make him larger or smaller, I can double click on it and I can punch in a size, let's say 150. So I've got a big version, or I can scale it to maximum size. I can go to edit, scale to maximum size, and I can get a very large version of Baby Yoda. And if I was to slice that, it'd probably take forever to print it. So I'm going to bump it back down, make it small. And let's go ahead and take a look at the infill. We talked about the parameters that it recommended being at 20%. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that at 20% infill. Hit prepare to print, and it's going to take a little while to slice this because it's a little bit more complex model. And here we have Baby Yoda with supports. And again, I can scrub through this and see how it's going to print. So let's go back and take a look at this infill. Again, I don't think I would need 20%. That's a pretty tight honeycomb in there, and it's quite a bit of material, especially if I would do like a massive version of this. So I'm going to go back and redo my process, and I'm going to turn this down to, let's say, 3%. And you'll see a difference. When we slice it, it'll be a little bit faster slice, and you'll see that the honeycomb is quite a bit larger as it prints. Yeah, it actually only has a big X in the middle of it, and I could probably get away with just printing the outer shell and printing no honeycomb in there. So that's the basics of downloading and making some adjustments in a slicer. 3D printing is an art in itself, and I print things probably differently than other people do, and I just try to make the success rate as high as possible, especially for students who are designing things in Cinema 4D or another CAD program. And we print quite a bit at a time, so it's been a matter of trial and error. And don't get frustrated with 3D printing. Hang in there with it. The more of it you do, the more troubleshooting you do, the more you can learn what to do and what not to do. So I have my iPad tripod mount that I ended up settling on for the time lapse, and I have my SD card ready to go. So I'm just going to go ahead and insert that into the printer. Select the file to print. Hit print, and in a few hours I'll have the model, and we'll talk about cleaning it up and perhaps painting it. Okay, so we have our Baby Yoda print, and there's a raft on the bottom, there's supports around the outside, and just a couple of quick things to clean up. The tools that I'm going to be using to clean it up are needle nose pliers. That's always my go-to. And I have a bunch of modeling tools, sculpting tools, and those are nice to get into those cracks and crevices and help you clean up the model a little bit further. You're also going to need some very fine grade sandpaper. I use the wet dry stuff. It doesn't clog as much. And I like to use modeling paste. This is Blick modeling paste just to fill in any little gaps. And I also use the modeling paste as glue sometimes. So when you get your print off of the bed, if you have a raft, you're going to want to take that off first with some needle nose pliers. Just take your time, be very careful. Go around the edge. You don't want to pull off something that's part of the model. And once you've gone around a couple of times, it should let go pretty easily. Any filament that's left on the bottom of it, you can just use a needle nose pliers or some of these modeling tools to just very carefully clean those up. The next step is to take off all of the supports. Be very careful doing that. When you're pulling off supports, it's best to just kind of grab large areas and wiggle it a little bit. If you don't and you just go ripping this stuff off, you're probably going to take parts of your model off. So take your time, wiggle those free, and the large chunks of them should come off pretty easy. Again, be very, very careful with small, delicate areas of your model so that you don't bust those off. The next step after you finish taking off the supports is to fix any little issues you may have with the print. This modeling paste works really well. It has the consistency of toothpaste. You can use your finger or a brush. I take a damp brush sometimes and go over top of the surface, or a damp finger, so you have less sanding to do once it dries. It takes about 24 hours to dry. It's thick enough too that you can actually glue pieces of models together with, and it holds really, really well. So after you get everything cleaned up and fixed and put together, and you've got your raft and perhaps your supports off of it, if you need to use modeling paste, let that dry for 24 hours. Then it's time to start sanding. Very, very lightly sand the top of the surface. Take off any little extra filament. Sometimes there'll be little filament streamers that are left from the nozzle head traveling from part to part as it prints. You're going to want to get rid of all of that. And once it's smooth and consistent, it's time for paint. I've had a lot of success spray painting models, and I also like to use acrylic paint. It doesn't have to be real expensive stuff. Any other model paint should work just fine. I've never had to prime anything, even though I'm printing with white filament. I tend to do that quite a bit, and then just go in and paint the model a color that I want. And the paint does a really good job of adhering. Might take a couple of coats, but you can cover a model pretty easy, especially if you're using a fuller body acrylic for it.